Every time my wife and I try to be intimate, her senior always has an emergency. It's either food poisoning, an allergy, or even suicide. Tonight, just as I had everything set up, planning to finally complete our wedding ceremony with my wife, her senior called, crying, saying he was afraid of the dark. My wife immediately pushed me away, and as I tried to stop her, she slapped me hard across the face. Your senior is crying because he's afraid of the dark, and all you care about is being intimate with me. You have no empathy, it's disgusting. That day, I calmly looked at the picture her senior sent of them sleeping together. I didn't cry or make a scene, I just told the system, send me back to my original world. I'm tired of this relationship. Hannah slapped me without mercy and slammed the door as she left. The wedding photo hanging by the bed was shaken loose and shattered into pieces. I crouched down, picking up the fragments one by one and piecing them together. The shards cut my fingertips, sending a pain like needles through my skin. I released the pieces and stood up, looking at the ruins of our wedding room, bitterly smiling, with a sharp pain in my heart. This was the 7th time Hannah had rejected my advances for Chris. It's laughable, really. As Hannah's husband, we had been in a relationship for 5 years, married for over a year. But we had never crossed that final boundary. At first, it was because Hannah had a simple and conservative view on relationships, wanting to save our first time for the wedding day. I respected her choice, so I held back and never touched her. Later, it was because of Hannah's senior, Chris. Whenever I wanted to be close to Hannah, Chris's emergency calls would come right on time, taking her away. It was either food poisoning, an allergy, or even suicide. The excuses got more and more absurd, more and more fake. Even a 3-year-old could tell they were lies, but Hannah believed them without question. So this time, after hearing Chris crying about being afraid of the dark, she unhesitatingly left me to go find him. Even though Chris had posted on Facebook not long ago about climbing Mount Tai at night. I looked at Hannah's smiling face in the wedding photo and sat there motionless all night. As dawn broke, my phone lit up. I thought it was a message from Hannah and quickly opened it. When I opened it, I found that it was Chris who had sent a few pictures. In the pictures, Hannah and Chris were holding hands, sweetly lying in his arms while they slept. It was the kind of intimacy I had never shared with Hannah. Even though we slept in the same bed every night, she never allowed me to hold her while sleeping. She said she was afraid I would mess up her carefully maintained hair. Weren't you afraid when you were with Chris? I didn't reply, silently stood up, and took down everything related to Hannah in the wedding house. By the time Hannah came home, the room had been completely cleaned up by me. She furrowed her brows and stopped me, picking up the wedding photo I had thrown in the trash. David, it was just a small thing yesterday, why are you making such a big deal out of it? And now, because of our marriage, Chris has developed severe depression. If I hadn't gone to see him last night, he might have committed suicide. Can you be more sensible? Don't make this difficult for me. She pushed a bowl of fish porridge in front of me. Chris is much more considerate than you. He specifically asked me to buy this for you to apologize. Eat it while it's hot, don't waste his kindness. You have to finish it. I looked at the fish slices floating in the porridge, a bitter feeling rising in my heart. We had been together for 6 years, and Hannah didn't even know that I was allergic to fish. If I have an allergic reaction, it could be life-threatening. I gave a bitter smile, snapped out of my thoughts, and made a firm decision, speaking to the system in my mind. I don't want to redeem the tragic female supporting character anymore. Send me back to my original world. I was a strategist who had crossed into this world. And Hannah was the obsessive female supporting character in this male-centric urban playboy novel, chasing after the male lead Chris. In the original storyline, she couldn't forget Chris after his accidental pursuit, which led her to depression. She spent all her family's wealth and gave up everything, but never won his true love. In the end, she was used as a tool to take a knife for Chris's true love and died tragically. My mission in this world was to redeem Hannah. The first time I met Hannah, she hadn't yet crossed paths with Chris. Completely different from the self-destructive character she played in the story, at this point she was still the radiant and noble young lady. She came from a wealthy family, had top grades, a gentle personality, and was pure and kind-hearted. No combination of beautiful words could fully describe her. I couldn't help but imagine what Hannah would be like in a world without Chris. She would definitely shine even brighter than she does now. I tried every possible way to get closer to her, to pursue her. I wanted to stand beside her as an equal, to be the strongest support behind her. I worked tirelessly to build my own business, becoming a rising star in the commercial world, on par with Hannah's family. Everything I did wasn't just to complete the task, but because I had slowly, without realizing, fallen in love with her. But just when we decided to get married, Chris suddenly showed up. Since then, Hannah seemed like a completely different person. The porridge on the table was starting to cool down, and Hannah, unable to hold back, moved the bowl in front of her, saying sarcastically, "If you don't want it, I will eat it." The great CEO was squabbling over food with a sick person. Who are you trying to show attitude to? Looking at her face, confused and slightly angry, a sense of grievance surged in my heart. For a split second, I even considered taking the porridge away from her and drinking it myself, just to see the regret on Hannah's face when she saw me suffering from an allergy. But soon, that thought was pushed aside. Why risk my life just for a little sympathy and pity? I asked Hannah back. I'm allergic to fish, didn't you know? Hannah froze, her gaze wandering awkwardly. A few seconds later, she opened a shopping page on her phone and pushed it in front of me. Then I'll buy you something else to make it up to you. Just tell me what you want. I didn't say anything, just watched as Hannah made her own purchase. A handmade tie, an expensive custom suit, and limited edition sneakers. They were all luxury items, but none of them were my size or to my liking. I couldn't help but remind Hannah. My shoe size is 44, Chris is the one who wears 41-sized sneakers. I've always preferred gun club collars for my suits, Chris likes the shawl collar. Since Chris appeared, has your world only revolved around him? I'm your husband. There was a brief silence, and then Hannah slowly turned around, flustered as she tried to explain. David, I didn't mean to. I'll stay with you today, we'll talk, and you'll see that things aren't what you think. She was about to say something else when, in the next moment, the phone rang. It was Chris calling again. Hannah hesitated and looked at me. A few seconds later, she made up her mind, let go of my hand, and rushed out. The wedding photo that Hannah had just hung back on the wall fell down again, shattered into pieces. The emotional strain that had been building up finally broke at this moment. I bent down to pick up the shattered photo, but as I leaned over, I unintentionally aggravated an old injury on my chest. The wound reopened, and the pain was unbearable. I forced myself to stay composed and took a taxi to the hospital to change the bandage. When I arrived at the hospital, I saw two familiar figures standing close to each other. I didn't expect Hannah and Chris to be here too. I was even more shocked to see Hannah, who was usually so delicate, running around taking care of Chris and personally feeding him his medicine. I clenched my fists, staring intensely at their actions. Every scene felt like a fresh stab to my heart. I didn't know how long it had been before Hannah noticed me. Her face turned slightly red, and she suddenly stood up and rushed in front of me. David! You're following me. I turned and walked past her, heading towards the second-floor bandage change station. You're overthinking. I'm just here to change my bandage. Hannah followed me, relentlessly pestering me. Stop making excuses. You've been going straight between work and home lately, how could you get hurt? I stopped in my tracks, forcing myself to suppress the anger rising inside. I grabbed Hannah's hand and pressed it over my wound, saying with a neutral expression, "This is an old injury from 6 months ago when I saved Chris." On our first wedding anniversary, Chris tried to commit suicide at home to get Hannah's attention. In a life-threatening moment, I rushed over to grab the knife from his hand but got injured in the process, leaving a deep wound across my torso. And because the wound was caused by a rusty knife, it got infected. Even though half a year has passed, the wound still hasn't healed and keeps festering with pus. At its worst, the infection caused a fever that led to shock. But Hannah didn't know any of this. When I was sick and needed her the most, she was always by Chris's side. Hannah paused for a moment, instinctively letting go of my hand. I shot her a cold glance and walked away quickly. Behind me, Hannah hurried to catch up and said, "David, your wound is so serious, why didn't you tell me?" I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. Tell her? It's not like I haven't told her before. When I needed bandages changed, when I was feverish and in shock, when I was forced to undergo surgery to remove the rotting flesh, I always messaged her first, hoping she would stay by my side. But the messages I sent always seemed to disappear without a trace. Over time, her indifference taught me to stay silent. I pursed my lips tightly and quickened my pace. Hannah was still unwilling to give up and chased after me, with Chris following close behind, looking pitiful as he tried to stop her. "Hannah! My heart hurts so much, don't leave me alone." To my surprise, Hannah shook off Chris's outstretched hand. She jogged to catch up with me, hooked her arm through mine, and said gently, "This time, I just want to be with you." By the time we returned home after the bandage change, it was already late at night. Hannah carefully helped me sit down on the couch, then took some vegetables into the kitchen. She looked at me seriously and said she wanted to cook a meal for me, to make up for the neglect she had shown recently. The system, seeing this, kept talking in my mind, urging me. "Host, you are only 1% away from completing the task. Success is within reach. Are you really going to give up now? Hannah still cares about you. A pampered young lady is willing to cook for you herself. That's proof of how deep her love for you is." I shook my head and laughed bitterly. But she has already done this 1,000 times for Chris. The system wanted to say more, but Hannah had already walked out of the kitchen. She looked a bit awkward. "David, what do you like to eat?" Just now, I realized that over the years, I don't even know what you like to eat. I looked at her and said calmly, "Then just make whatever Chris likes, I don't care." Hannah's eyes instantly lit up. "How about boiled pork slices, twice cooked pork, cold rabbit, these dishes? Last time, Chris complimented me, saying it tasted exactly like his mom's cooking." She looked at me expectantly after saying that. I shook my head and gave a wry smile. "No, I don't want anything that Chris likes." Hannah, realizing something was off, her face turned cold. "Are you deliberately tricking me?" Okay. How come I never noticed how scheming and petty you are? I've already apologized, what more do you want? Do you want to force me to cut ties with Chris to be satisfied? Are you trying to drive Chris crazy?" She was furious, seemingly trying to provoke me on purpose. At dinner, despite my injury not being fully healed, she made a huge spread of Chris's favorite Sichuan dishes. She picked up a piece of pickled fish and put it in my bowl. "Stop getting all high and mighty. I've given you a way out, so take it. Eat it already." I looked at the fish in my bowl, and my heart grew colder with each passing moment. Just this morning, I had told her I was allergic to fish. In less than a day, she had completely forgotten about it. The system spoke up to comfort me. "Host, maybe Hannah just made a careless mistake. She didn't mean to. Once is an accident, but the second time? Can it still be considered an accident?" When I was pursuing Hannah, in order to please her, I almost turned myself into a second version of her. I watched the movies she liked, listened to the songs she enjoyed, ate the food she favored. But when it came to allergens, I never compromised and repeatedly told her I was allergic to fish, that it could cause anaphylactic shock and even kill me. Yet, despite all the reminders and the day-by-day interactions, she never took it to heart. She never took me to heart. I shook my head. Enough. You don't have to make excuses for her. I've made up my mind. I'm giving up the mission and leaving this world. I had to consider that disappearing suddenly would cause a commotion. So, I decided to take a month to complete this task. The first thing I did was transfer all the company's responsibilities to my assistant. With so much to handle, it took me a whole week to get all the paperwork done. During this time, Hannah didn't call me once. Ever since I came back from the hospital, she had been giving me the silent treatment. Maybe she still thought I would act like before, and even if it was her fault, I would unconditionally forgive her. I would humbly apologize and beg for her forgiveness. But those days were long gone. After stepping down from the company, I went to the amusement park alone. After experiencing all the couple S rides, I got on the Ferris wheel and watched the midnight fireworks. When the Ferris wheel reached the top, Hannah called. She was furious. "You haven't contacted me for so long, what the hell have you been doing?" I looked at the dazzling fireworks and calmly replied, "I'm at the amusement park, on the Ferris wheel watching fireworks." There was a hint of gritted teeth in Hannah's voice. "Who are you with? You didn't take me on the Ferris wheel to watch fireworks. Do you have a new girlfriend?" I froze for a moment, remembering the legend Hannah once told me about the Ferris wheel. When the Ferris wheel reaches the highest point, couples will receive eternal love and happiness. During our relationship, Hannah had been pestering me to do this. But for various reasons, we never got around to it. I paused, then retorted, "You really care? Didn't you and Chris already do it on the Ferris wheel? 3 months ago, Chris posted a picture of you two on the Ferris wheel." Hannah paused, and after a long moment, she managed to squeeze out 2 words through clenched teeth. "But we haven't sat together yet. I'll take a cab right now and come over to watch with you. You better not leave, wait for me there." The call was hung up, and the Ferris wheel had reached the top. I was about to follow the crowd and leave, but the system stopped me. "Host, aren't you going to wait for Hannah?" I couldn't deny it, "She won't come." The system sounded anxious. "What if? If Hannah does come, wouldn't it prove that her feelings for you are real?" "Host, there is still a chance to save your relationship." In the end, I couldn't argue with the system and quietly sat on a bench in the park, waiting for Hannah. But until the fireworks ended, and the crowd dispersed, there was still no sign of Hannah. Not even a single call. The system sounded a bit guilty. "Don't worry, maybe something happened on the way. Isn't that how it always goes in the novels? When the male and female leads clear up their misunderstandings, there are always all sorts of obstacles and accidents. Let me help you search for her." A flash of white light passed before my eyes, and the system linked its vision with mine, searching over the city skyline. We scanned through the bustling crowd and found Hannah. But the location wasn't on her way to the amusement park, it was at a couple's hotel. Chris's cheeks were flushed, and he weakly leaned against Hannah. "Sorry, I've caused you to come all the way here to take care of me. It must have been those punks who dislike me who did something to me." Hannah shook her head, patiently unbuttoned Chris's shirt, and wiped his body with a wet towel. She placed Chris's hand on her thigh and blushed as she asked, "I am fine, I'm just worried about your health. Is it enough if I help you like this? Do you need me to do more?" Chris gasped for breath and hugged her tightly. "But you're already married. If I cause problems between you and David, I won't be able to forgive myself. I can still endure. After all, it's not like I can't hold out until the very end and lose all function forever." I thought Hannah would pull away from Chris's touch, but she didn't. Instead, she pressed herself even closer to Chris and kissed him on the lips. Her eyes were red and swollen, filled with sorrow. "No. You've already sacrificed so much for me. I'm willing to be your antidote." The system urgently tried to cut off the scene but clumsily turned up the volume instead. For a moment, the sounds of kissing and clothes rustling filled the air. They kept assaulting my eardrums and my eyes. After hesitating for a while, the system spoke to comfort me. "Maybe it's Chris's strong aura as the main character that's influencing Hannah uncontrollably. Once she is no longer with Chris, she'll return to normal." I gave a bitter smile and closed my eyes. There was a time when I comforted myself like this. To test my theory, I specifically chose Iceland for our honeymoon, across the ocean. I intended to cut off Chris's influence on her. But on the day we arrived in Iceland, she abandoned me because of a phone call from Chris. I stood alone on the freezing, bitter cold ice, recalling the advice the system gave me when I first arrived in this world. It told me that my progress in the strategy would affect Hannah's self-awareness. By the time we got married, my progress with Hannah had reached 99%, enough to free her from the control of the plot. So, all of Hannah's care and affection toward Chris over the past year has been her own choice. While I was lost in thought, the system activated the mind reading function for Hannah. Various data appeared around her. Host: it must be Chris who has influenced Hannah. Her love for you is nearly full, she could never betray you. The next moment, the system's voice suddenly stopped. In reality, Hannah's actions toward Chris were completely voluntary. The nearly perfect love value and the words completely voluntary side by side were utterly absurd. The air fell silent for a moment. The system spoke again, agreeing to my request to leave this world. What surprised me was that the system didn't punish me for failing the mission. It simply took back all the rewards I had earned while trying to win over Hannah. The system seemed to sense my confusion and added, "For humanitarian reasons, the responsibility for mission failure is clearly divided between the host and the target of the mission. In this case, Hannah is fully responsible for the failure, and it has nothing to do with you. After you leave the world, we will punish Hannah for her failure." After reaching an agreement with the system, I started dealing with the aftermath, saying my goodbyes to the people I knew. I took a portion of the wealth I had from the company and returned to the orphanage where I had been raised. My background wasn't perfect in both of my past lives, I had been abandoned as an orphan. Luckily, when I traveled to this world, I was no longer alone. I was adopted by the head of the orphanage and experienced the warmth and care that I hadn't known in my previous life. I donated all the remaining wealth I had to the orphanage. After completing the donation process, the head of the orphanage stopped me and pressed an envelope into my hand. "David, we truly thank you for everything you've done for the orphanage. I couldn't attend your wedding, but I'm here now to congratulate you. This red envelope is a token of appreciation from everyone here, don't think it's too little." The head of the orphanage patted my shoulder. "When do you plan on having children?" "Once the child is born, I'll definitely give them a big red envelope in person." Looking at the loving face of the head, I couldn't bring myself to reveal the truth. I held back my tears, putting on a smile. "All right, when the child is born, I'll definitely bring them to visit you." After leaving the orphanage, I visited Hannah's parents. As soon as they saw me, they immediately smiled and welcomed me into their home. Hannah's mother looked at me with affection, a bit worried. "Why didn't you call before coming home?" "I was out buying groceries to make your favorite steak." "Hannah must not have taken good care of you, you've lost weight." Faced with their attentive concern, I couldn't help but feel my eyes well up. When I was pursuing Hannah, I was still a poor guy. I thought they would look down on me and use money to force me to leave. But they gave me full respect and allowed me to grow. Later, after they found out about my efforts for Hannah, they treated me like their own son and took care of me. They gave me endless warmth. Hannah's mother panicked and quickly asked, "David, what's wrong? Did something happen at work? If there's something, tell Mom and Dad. We'll figure it out for you." I shook my head, stood up, and walked toward the door. "Mom, Dad, you don't have to treat me so well anymore. I'm going to divorce Hannah. I came to say goodbye to you." Hannah's mother immediately stood up and grabbed me. "What's going on between you and Hannah? I'll call her back right away to get to the bottom of this." "David, don't rush. Let's talk things through. You can't joke with marriage." I sighed and spoke seriously. "Hannah won't be coming back. She just confirmed her relationship with Chris at the hotel. She probably won't have time to care about me." I thought for a moment, then added, "Chris isn't a good match for her. Since I won't be around, please take care of Hannah and make sure she doesn't suffer because of him." Hannah's parents' expressions became more anxious. They stood in front of me, trying to persuade me to stay. I didn't want to cause conflict, so I stopped and helplessly looked at them. As we were in a standoff, the sound of a key turning in the door came through. "Dad! Mom! I'm back to see you." Hannah, beaming with joy, pushed the door open. When she saw me, her expression froze. "David, what are you doing here?" In front of her parents, Hannah toned down her usual aggressive attitude. She moved to my side, playfully tapping my chest and smiling. "David, you're such a troublemaker. You should have told me you were coming to see Mom and Dad. We could have come together." I frowned, moved a little further from her, and avoided her reaching hand. "Stop pretending, our parents already know about us." Hannah's face instantly darkened, and she glared at me, enraged and embarrassed. "David! What do you mean by this? You're making a scene just because of a little jealousy? And you're purposely embarrassing me in front of our parents?" Hannah's mother immediately came forward, grabbing her hand and asking, "Hannah, what exactly happened between you and David? Was what happened with Chris last night real?" Hearing Chris's name, Hannah's face went pale instantly. She looked at me, her eyes full of disbelief. Hannah's mother kept urging her to answer. Hannah gritted her teeth and said, "Yes. I was with Chris last night." The more she spoke, the more confident she became. "So what?" "He was drugged, and I couldn't just watch him suffer the effects and long-term damage." Hannah's father's face turned red, and he immediately slapped her. "You shameful girl. Why does it matter to you? Didn't he know to call an ambulance himself?" Hannah covered her face, her eyes filled with anger, raising her voice. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was already too late for first aid. What if Chris really has lasting effects? And now society is open, it's not like it used to be. So many people aren't virgins when they start dating. What's wrong with me making one mistake? You old-fashioned bunch, why don't you go arrest everyone else too? Why just blame me?" Watching her act so recklessly without a hint of regret made me feel disgusted. I didn't want to say another word to her and just walked out. Behind me, her mother was still urging Hannah to go after me and apologize. Hannah refused in an unpleasant tone. "Why should I apologize? It's David who is being narrow-minded and causing trouble with me. I'll ignore him for a while. Once he thinks things through, he'll come back." After leaving Hannah's house, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I took the subway and made a detour to the little bridge where Hannah and I had our special moment, for a final goodbye. The evening breeze brushed against my face, bringing a refreshing coolness that helped clear my mind. Just as I was leisurely walking across the bridge, someone suddenly called out to me from behind. "David, long time no see, do you remember me?" I turned around, and after recognizing who it was, I was a bit surprised. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" Sarah was a close friend of mine back in school, but after graduating from university, her parents arranged for her to go abroad for further studies. Since then, we hadn't seen each other again. Sarah caught up with me and walked alongside me, smiling slightly. "After I returned to the country, I heard about your recent situation from some of our other classmates. I figured you'd come here to clear your mind. So I've been making it a point to come here every day and wait for you." I was a bit speechless, surprised by how well Sarah seemed to understand me. At the same time, I felt even more disheartened by Hannah. Seemingly noticing my thoughts, Sarah immediately spoke to comfort me. "I know things have been tough for you recently, and you probably don't feel like catching up with me here. I'm waiting here to tell you one thing." She straightened up and took a handful of wildflowers from behind her, pushing them into my hands. "No matter what, make sure to love yourself." The fresh fragrance of the flowers filled the air, briefly lifting the weight in my heart. Sarah clasped her hands behind her back and gave me a playful smile. "If possible, I hope you'll consider me as well." With that, she turned to leave. I smiled back, waved her off, and was about to head home with the flowers. But suddenly, a figure dashed toward me from across the bridge. Hannah, her eyes red, snatched the flowers from my arms and threw them on the ground. "Are you going to divorce me because of this woman?" I was taken aback, pulling my hand away from hers. I bent down, picking up the flowers Hannah had thrown and carefully arranging them. But to my surprise, Hannah rushed at me again and snatched the flowers away. Her voice choked with emotion. I only just found out from my parents that you want a divorce. Why do you want to divorce me? Just because I cared a little more about Chris? I still care about you. She desperately tried to prove herself. If I didn't care about you, how could I know you were here? How could I find you so easily? Before I could speak, Sarah immediately exposed her lie. Sarah waved her phone. You found him because you asked in the old class group, didn't you? The address was told to you by me. Hannah's face immediately darkened, her gaze darting back and forth between me and Sarah. After a while, she sneered. Then how did you know David was here? You two, a single man and woman, secretly meeting here, what are you planning to do? Sarah immediately shot back. You think everyone is like you, assuming everyone else is like you? And by the way, David has already decided to divorce you. Whatever he wants to do, whoever he wants to be with, it's his choice. Hannah was so furious that she was speechless, her chest heaving violently. She angrily lunged at Sarah, shouting, We haven't divorced yet. I'll kill you, you who keeps thinking about other people's husbands. She missed slapping Sarah's face. I grabbed Hannah's wrist and threw her onto the stone steps. Sarah was protected behind me, looking terrified. After all the trouble, I had no more patience left for Hannah. I no longer cared about her face. So, in front of Sarah, I ruthlessly exposed all the dirty details about her and Chris. Enough! I only ran into Sarah once and caught up with her, and you're acting like this. But when you stayed out all night with Chris and gave yourself to him in a hotel, did you ever think about my feelings? Who do you think you are, to have the nerve to criticize me? Hannah's face suddenly turned ashen. She struggled to get up from the ground, trying to pull me. But I ruthlessly waved it away. I grabbed Sarah's wrist and left without looking back. The emotions I had been holding in were finally released, and I felt much lighter. Under the moonlight, I awkwardly confessed to Sarah that I was the one behind the plan all along. I scratched my head. This has always been between me and her, I didn't expect to drag you into it. Sarah wasn't surprised, and instead, she looked at me with a hint of envy. Hearing that, I kind of envy Hannah, being able to receive your unconditional care and love. She turned to look at me. It's like how I've been silently loving you for these 8 years, without you ever knowing. I thought it was because I wasn't good enough, not trying hard enough, that's why we missed each other. But I never expected that everything was already decided by fate. How wonderful would it have been if I was the one chosen by the system to be saved by you? Seeing her forcing a smile, for a moment, I actually felt a bit heartbroken. The system appeared at the right time. Host, I can change your mission for you, switching the target from Hannah to Sarah. She is so deeply in love with you. Maybe you two could end up happily together, and your story would become legendary. I thought for a moment, then resolutely shook my head. I take my emotions seriously. Liking someone means I truly like them, and if I don't, then I don't. Choosing to be with Sarah for some fleeting honor would be disrespectful to her. I took the bouquet Sarah gave me to the florist, had it rewrapped, and then carefully handed it back to her. Returning her wishes to me. No matter what, always love yourself well. You will definitely find someone who loves you with all their heart. I'm just a passing figure in your life, and I'll soon leave this world. Please forget about me and find your own happiness. Time flew by like sand slipping through my fingers, and a month passed quickly. I chose a suitable cemetery for myself, told my secretary to bury my ashes, and then, without hesitation, took my own life. The system activated pain blockers for me, so when I died, I didn't feel much pain. Before my soul completely left this world, the system took me to see Hannah's current situation. Ever since we had that argument, she has been getting more and more involved with Chris. Hannah's parents tried to talk some sense into her, but she refused to listen to them. She arrogantly said, didn't David think I'd get jealous and beg him? Well, I won The more tricks he pulls, the faster he'll lose me. After saying that, she put on heavy makeup, wore a sexy backless dress, and went to meet Chris. But Chris acted indifferent towards her. He lazily leaned against the booth, casually kissed the girl in his arms, then turned his gaze towards Hannah. "What is it?" Hannah couldn't believe it. "What are we, then? Don't you love me anymore?" Chris raised an eyebrow impatiently. "We're just innocent friends. You're a married woman with a husband. Show some respect when you speak. I'm not interested in being your side guy." Hannah's face turned pale, a mixture of embarrassment and humiliation. She stood there in the middle of the booth, on the verge of collapse from everyone's mocking laughter. Maybe it was the buildup of emotions, but she suddenly snapped. She took off her high heels and threw them at Chris. The scene erupted into chaos. In the end, the bartenders had to physically throw her out. Chris wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and scoffed. "Next time I see that woman, I'll hit her again." No one knows how much time passed before Hannah finally shakily got up from the ground. She leaned against the wall, trying to steady herself, tears and snot streaming down her face. She dialed my number, her voice full of frustration and trembling. "David, come take me home. I'm already dead. Hannah will never be able to find me again." She dialed a dozen calls, but no one picked up. All she could hear was the static from the line. It wasn't until dawn that someone finally answered the phone on the other end. Hannah immediately said with joy, "Stop joking around, David. I'm willing to meet your request and cut ties with Chris. Come pick me up, we're still married. I'll treat you better from now on and make up for everything." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, then the voice of a secretary came through. "I'm sorry, but Mr. David has passed away." Hannah's body stiffened, and she screamed in disbelief. "No way. He was just arguing with me a few days ago, how could he be dead? Have David tell me himself. Only then will I believe it." There was no reply on the other end, and the secretary hung up the call. When Hannah rushed to the company, stumbling and desperate to see me, she only learned of my cremation. The secretary stopped her at the door, speaking in a flat tone. "I can't tell you where his tombstone is. Mr. David once made it clear that he never wanted to see you again in his lifetime, not even after his death." Hannah trembled, staring blankly at the secretary. After a while, she hoarsely said, "I don't believe it. You're all lying to me, you're all lying to me. How could he not want to see me? I'm his wife." She seemed to have lost her mind, grabbing the secretary's collar and demanding, "Before he left, did he leave any message for me?" The secretary, with a sympathetic look, handed her the signed divorce papers. "This is all he left." Hannah didn't speak anymore. She covered her face and let out a desperate wail. Back in the real world, my body was still young. The system sent me back to the year I had just graduated from college and kindly healed the old ailments left in my body. Using the experience and skills I had accumulated while pursuing my goals, I started a new business. Gradually, I began to achieve some success. Late at night, the system would occasionally show up, complaining about Hannah's downfall. After I left the world, the system imposed a punishment on Hannah for failing her mission. The personal cognition that had awakened inside her was gradually erased, and everything she said and did had to follow the original storyline. Even though she and Chris had completely torn their relationship apart and couldn't stand each other, she still had no choice but to get close to Chris, beg for his attention, and endure his humiliation. The system was smug. When Chris treats her like a dog, she's still thinking about your name in her heart. She deserves it. Since you don't want redemption, then let the original story completely fall apart. Facing Hannah's tragic situation, I felt absolutely nothing inside. I only felt a bit sorry for Hannah's parents, who were innocently dragged into this. After all, Hannah's parents had given me more warmth and affection than I could ever ask for. Hearing my concern, the system immediately comforted me. It told me that after my death, Hannah's parents would sever all ties with her, cutting off her financial support. No matter how tangled Hannah and Chris were, it wouldn't affect her parents at all. After everyone received the outcome they deserved, the system informed me that it was about to begin executing the next mission. I felt a little reluctant and thanked him. Thank you for your help after the mission. I will never forget you. But then the system suddenly laughed. Don't make it sound so sentimental, we'll meet again. Before I could ask the system what it meant, it disappeared from my mind. 5 years later, my company officially went public, and everything was on track. I finally took a long-awaited vacation and traveled to the south. It was the off-season for tourism, and the attractions were nearly empty, with only a few scattered town residents heading out to work under the morning sun. I hurried, wanting to get to the bridge to capture the sunrise. But amidst the glowing sky, I saw a familiar figure. Through the light and shadow, Sarah smiled at me and reached out her hand. This time, across the world, I am here to love you.